My name is Bradley Steyn. I was born in Pretoria, South Africa. Growing up, I witnessed firsthand the brutality of hate and apartheid. And as a teenager in 1988, I survived a massacre that would change the course of my life forever. And that's why I decided to take a stand and join the intelligence unit of Nelson Mandela's spy network. In the course of our dedicated efforts during that time, we successfully unearthed a sinister plot to assassinate Nelson Mandela at his 1994 inauguration. This was a pivotal moment in South African history. Would we go into civil war, or would there be peace? But it also marked a significant stride towards advancing human rights for all us South Africans. Little did I know, a hit was placed on us, and I just managed to escape South Africa and find refuge abroad. I used my experiences and my expertise and teamed up with leading security professionals, where I was fortunate enough to work with some of the most fascinating people in the world. Now I'm back in South Africa, ready to take on the rising tide of crime, murder, and corruption that has tainted South Africa's journey towards liberation and our democracy. Join me, Bradley Steyn, your co-host, along with journalist and author Janet Smith, and our special lineup of guests as we go undercover. In this series, we will be declassifying our past, while we bring you the untold stories of our silent warriors, activists, and patriots. We'll also get a different perspective from our youth, where our democracy is today, 30 years later. Through these conversations, together we can shape the future we aspire to.
Baron Strydon's racist massacre on a public square in Pretoria was one of the defining events of the last years of apartheid. It was November 1988. Global condemnation and international boycotts were finally grinding the world's supremacist outpost to a halt. But even as expectations grew that there could be a peaceful transition to democracy, some, like Strydom, believed whites were being betrayed. The former policeman and army conscript set out to make his statement in the most horrifying way possible. In total, 8 black people were the victims of his rage. The blood that covered the piazza outside the State Theatre also came to mark the boundary between freedom and a form of captivity for Bradley Steyn, who was a teenager when he walked into the mass shooting. Bradley's life was spared by the killer because he was white. Yet that bloodied boundary was so destructive to his mental health that Bradley eventually put down those experiences and the astonishing true-life events which followed into a non-fiction thriller, Undercover with Mandela's Spies. This podcast takes you on a journey with Bradley and a number of extraordinary guests to examine the toll South Africa's battlefields has taken on our minds and how we can continue to work on our shared recovery. I am Janet Smith, and in this episode, we welcome MK veteran, author, and former Western Cape detective boss, Jeremy Vearey. Please join us for How to Survive the Underground, which is created in honor of Strydom's 4th victim, 32-year-old Manake Samuel Motipa. Manake was shot in the chest on Prinsloo Street when Strydom encountered him during his racist rampage. Thank you for joining us. I'll hand over to Bradley now to welcome our guest.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Jeremy, for being here. So, Jeremy, I'm really excited about this particular interview because of many of our listeners here in Cape Town and the rest of South Africa will know who he is. And he's Umkhonto, a son of Elsie's River, a patriot, the people's general. And my handler and Neil de Beer's handler during our stint with the ANC in MK during the underground. It's interesting that we find ourselves here in Woodstock, Cape Town, just a few blocks away from the ANC's office here in the Western Cape. Jeremy was also a teacher growing up, a political activist. He was jailed and spent several years on Robben Island. And he was mine and Neil de Beer's handler during the Dirty War in the early 1990s. Jeremy, our episode on how to survive the underground. I recall reading an interesting piece in your book where you told this brilliant story of when, under your command in the ANC intelligence structures, you had to actually put the ANC's offices in Woodstock under counter surveillance from... I'll let you tell the story. Your Seike Brits is involved in that story, and it's a great interlude into the world we come from.
Okay. I think the context of the time, there were two ANC offices. There was one ANC office where you saw the public face of the ANC up in Victoria Road, more or less where First National Bank is now. Then there was a Covert office in which people like myself sat in an undercover capability with Lincoln, me and Andre Lincoln, which is further down Albert Road in a complex just before you get to the Good Hope Centre, that section of the bridge. Now, so we had this where everybody was interested in getting into, the security police, military intelligence, NIS were interested in this office. Then we had our undercover offices where we operated under a false front, if I should put it that, or company name. Now the incident you are referring to was one where one of the sources of one of my colleagues, we were all, Andre, myself, and his colleague, Madikize, Jacob, we were the leadership of the NC's intelligence wing in the province. And we had picked up information from a source that they were planning to come into this office in Victoria Road, basically access all our hard drives, and then also thoroughly bug the whole facility, and also access the telephone box. Back then you used to bug lines via the siphoning off from the telephone box out there. And we had all of this information, and that for this purpose they needed the keys of the building. I was very skeptical of this source. I mean, I'm a trained intelligence officer. I'll tell you about that later. And I was worried that the source was going to play it. So I got directly involved in the interrogation. I was a bit of a different animal than my rest of my college. I was very clinical and professional, and I had certain requirements that I wanted intelligence-wise, and if you don't meet it, I will get you to meet it. That was my approach. So reluctantly, I decided, okay, but then I remember the head then, Jacob, said, okay, if you're so skeptical about this operation, you run the response to it. So I said, okay, I'll do it. I feel more comfortable with it. So we arranged that the source takes the keys to this intelligence handler from the security branches side. And we had the exact timing, and then I said, okay, I told our head, the way I'm going to run this is my way. I'm going to get a few people. I have AKs, I have F1 hand grenades, and we're going to make a show out of these people. At the time, CODESA, there was a CODESA process, and I was also a bit skeptical about CODESA. I thought this kind of political grandstanding there is not really going to deliver anything. So let's prove it and show how insincere the branch is still in those things. On the night of the operation, we were lying in wait for this team. There was the police task force that was also used. There were one particular operative I was interested in cornering. I write about him, Kale Kalitz. He was excellent. He became my colleague afterwards in the intelligence world. And I really wanted to neutralize him because he seems to be a bit of an intellectual challenge in the intelligence world, and also operationally quite a challenge. He happened to be there, but because I was inside controlling the operation, the people outside didn't recognize him. And then they said there was this, we had radios, Motorola's, the very small ones back then, and I heard a report that, listen, there's a chap here who sleeps here in the building. He's a vagrant, a white guy, looks dirty and all of those things. He wants to come in. My instinct was to say, that's Cully. Grab him. But then, in the scuffle, Cully got away. He extracted himself. The task force people took him out of the situation, and because I really wanted him. Because the idea was, if I had him, I would have interrogated him, and I had 2 journalists on standby, Benny Gould and who was his partner back then? I can't, Russell Friedman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had all of them on standby to do the filming with the whole work. We had Dalla Omar, who would release a press statement on this particular issue at that point in time. But luckily, he got away. And so we were able to stop that. But what I'm talking about the time is, you know, while the whole world was caught up in the euphoria of Madeba and Codesa, they were in the intelligence world, business was usual. It was business as usual. It was still going about trying to neutralize each other, extract information from each other's environment. And I think that's coming to the context through to where we are now with Brad in the book that he wrote. It was important for us. And just before we go to Brad, in the other context, I had got hold of a list from another informer of ours who was a security branch operative of a series of acts that with names that people were applying for on the assumption that there's going to be Nuremberg trials. So the security branch headquarters, Basi Smith and them, had given an instruction to all members in the country to list all the things they did, because they assumed, because in the ANC side, there was a Motianyani commission and the issues in the camps were being addressed.
Yes.
And people had to go through a similar TRC-like process. They assumed exactly the same is going to happen to them. So they preempted that by getting all the stories so that they can prepare legally. I happened to be handed over back then it was a stiffy disc in the Diaz Tavern by one of my sources in the branch who worked there. And at the time I was thinking, I had an argument with Andre and them, Lincoln. I said, listen, let's go aggressive on this one. Let's give this to the media. Okay, instead of working this endlessly on, that they decided against it and probably made the wiser decision, because after that we became involved in using that information to compromise more security branch police officers by going to them and saying, listen, such and such a date you killed B at that part on the border. By the way, you confess to it, we have everything. So work with us because we're going to be the government.
Yeah.
So if you want to save your job, so many people came over to us. That was the contact thing. But there were some diehards like Andy Miller, okay? And perhaps Eugene de Kock and these people whom you really couldn't deal with in that particular way, because they were probably as professional, as hardcore as some of us were, like myself in particular. And this is where I think Brad in his book comes in with one of the important tasks of the time was when we started discovering they're destroying records, they're even going to Blackheath in a furnace and driving as far, we monitored them as far as Isco in Saldanha, it was Isco back then, to actually go dump things into furnaces. We said, no, wait a minute. We need to stop that flow. So part of getting, this is where they became important, who had links with Andy Miller and these people, because we needed certain records of dark ops that were still going on against the ANC and in South Africa. So with the branch, through Andy becoming a private target, him and Neil de Beer became important assets that we had to do that. He probably correctly says that maybe Andre was more human and gentle in these things. I came from a different culture at the time. I had just recently come back from a course with the British Special Air Services, and I was with the SIS. I was sent there through something Madiba arranged with Thatcher. Yes. 15 of us. We spent time in the SAS in Fort Monkton, in Portsmouth, for quite a few months. So we were trained in a different kind of intelligence practice, and there it is ruthlessly extractive. You cultivate assets, yes. You extract from it according to a set of information, and you manage people. So I came with that, whereas Andre was the more gentle one. And I was more, I didn't want to waste time with the personal stuff that they were involved with. Yeah. That was more Andre's business. And I was interested, listen, you do this at that time, and you give us this at such a time, we'll protect you. That was my thing. The relations of, course, in later years changes.
Yes.
Through the influence of Andre and through the engagement with Brad and Neil de Beer, I sort of stepped off that very professional clinical wagon, because you then begin to see the human being within the asset, as we do.
That was a very interesting time, because Jeremy's right. He was almost so stoic and professional that it was hard to read him. But Andre was a lot more empathetic to me. Andre and I actually got on more back then, and it's amazing that all these years later that how Jeremy and I have now become so much closer. It's fascinating. I just want to jump back to the story when you had the counter surveillance going on the black site ops, black site office for the ANC, the covert office for the ANC. So that operative that went there, he was. I think I remember saying he smelled like booze and
he was good.
He smelled like piss and he was very, very good.
Cully was the consummate intelligence covert operative. Cully infiltrated the right wing.
Yeah.
And if you see photos of him in the Iron Guard, you won't. I'm not talking about the overt person who shouts the slogans.
Yeah.
You see the professional, hard Iron Guard person in the AWB. Cully, in my own book, he was vital to the Worcester bomb blast tracing of Jan Football and all of those suspects. Oh, wow. Vital in identifying the police complicity in warning Jan Football to run. So Cully Cully was a strange. He was not an ideologue, if I should say.
He's an operator.
He's an operator. Yeah. Him and Gordon Brugrange, these people who, politics aside, they enjoyed their job. They enjoyed the profession, the craft of it. I also enjoyed it,
the trade craft.
I'm not talking about your gang branch person, the Loop Street officers of the security police and that. I'm talking the undercover capacity of
the clandestine
officers.
Yes.
These were people like Gordon who ran Europe.
Yes.
They ran Europe. People who could assume covers. That was very like Gordon, for example. He found out he had an Irish link in his family, so he ended up in the IRA, going to infiltrate UK through the IRA and getting into the radical circles via that side. So, these are people who have a certain intellectual prowess was running. And when you're running an undercover office, remember, everything is false. From the people who work there to the identity to the way you set up props. It's like a film that you're making.
Yes.
But it's permanent, And
building the cover.
Building the cover code. These are people who are professional about those things. So I respected that because that's the way I was trained also.
Yes. Well, I'm very, very interested to find out how you were introduced to the idea of Bradley and Neil, of course. How did you first come across them, in terms of your undercover, work together with Joan Klantler and others? What was that introduction like? And then also, how did you vet a person like Bradley, who was very young and who had this chaotic kind of background, really, since that day on Stratham Square, and then becoming an operative in a strange way on the streets of Cape Town?
Okay. We got to Bradley in the circumstances that he's coming through another party, through somebody else in our ranks who had already had dealings with him, and we had to be there to take over. But one other part that interested us at the time was a guy called Cyril Beker. And we discovered that this Cyril Beker, who claims to work for us also, via Moshake and all of these people,
yes,
that in the Cape we were very skeptical about him. Possibly he was a double. Okay? But we found that he was involved in the security industry, or the bodyguarding industry, that was set up by Andy Miller.
Yes.
Back then, the branch set up that. And then that was the beginning of extortion rackets that were running.
Andy Miller was the special branch that died in the wool.
Hard
apartheid special branch.
That guy was no
That
joke.
guy is not he was a real ideologue part of the job. Hardcore. He was not going to change. Look, there are some people that you're not going to be able to go into the new South Africa with. They are just simply, and they will tell you that. They don't hide it. And he was such a type of person. He's the guy who started SAPU, the union. Not that SAPU's identity should be tied to him, but he's hardcore. He was a plain different kind of
he was
operative.
a scary guy.
Thing. And we were interested in him, and somewhere the names of Neil was gravitating with that, especially, and yourself, but Neil more particularly because of that, the extortion started against the Chinese community.
That's right.
And we were picking up, wait a minute, we're worried. What is the Chinese community getting involved? Yeah, because we were getting a reaction from certain triad groups, the 14K Hull and the Washing War Triad, were beginning to worry about this and wanting to make deals with the extortionists. And that would have grown organized crime if that had happened to a scale that would have been much more frightening than what we are today at a very early stage.
Yes.
So we were concerned off with the politics, off with the crime, the organized criminal, and they became important assets to expose the security police involvement in the extortion process, because they had access there. So that is the first part of it, and the use of the security industry in surveillance against the ANC and in dark ops against the African National Congress in the Western Cape. You see, Vlak Plus was not necessarily strong,
Yes.
It was not that active, so they had to use different capacities, outsource different capacities.
Different proxies.
To use to do the job. So that's how we came into contact with Brad and them. But my thing with Brad was, like I said, in the beginning, he's an asset. Do this by that. Go to this right-wing thing, do that by that. And to me, one of the things that was, as an analyst, not an analyst, an intelligence professional, the weaknesses are the strengths. Let me put it to you this way.
Right.
If you had somebody who's adventurous, who's gung-ho, is going out, it's a matter of, yes, the person has the right energy, to the right attitude to face danger, to face the risk. All you need to do is to tailor the adventurousness of it.
Yes.
And that's the job. Tailor the adventurous part of it, but keep the aggression, the aggression, the disillusionment with what was there before, or the new direction. It might not be clear, Brad might not have understood everything about the ANC, but the seed was enough to use to maintain commitment, to drive whatever we needed intelligence-wise. So you use that, you use that. You see a person you can place in highly risky situations, far away from outside the front line, behind enemy lines.
No support.
No support, because that person has that survival instinct to fight through that situation. Sure. Despite the fact that if things go pear-shaped, you'll deny that. But anyway, that is what you see in a person like him, or in a person like Neil. And of course, if there are certain things that needs to be done, they will do it. You see, like many of the security policemen who worked with, because, like with the security policemen, for example, who turned over to our side, many of them were only interested in whether or not they're going to be on a Nuremberg trial after 1994.
Yes,
we
their motivation
we of course sketched the picture. Listen, don't worry, we'll save you. We'll be there. If somebody puts you on trial, we'll be there. Don't worry. It's all bullshit you sell in the beginning, but anyway, that's what the ends justified the means in that particular thing.
Yes. It was a dirty war at that time.
Well, okay.
But the dirty war still continues. So, I just wanted to ask Jeremy if Jeremy's written 3 fascinating books now. Two of them are published. One's in the process of being published. Jeremy, your book, Jeremy van die Elsies, was fascinating to me because it brought the rich language of Afrikaans to pages so that people could read these stories. And I remember, I just want to talk about the way you grew up, and I remember reading in your book that you were a little guy running with no shoes on, and a policeman grabbed you by the ear, and tell us about your early days, your kom vandaan, where you come from, and your activism, and how you ended up in jail on Robben Island.
Okay. Firstly, I grew up in what partly Tivoli and then partly also Elsies River, but at a time in the 60s and early 70s when large parts of those areas were an informal settlement. In other words, it was a site of a holding area between people who suffered under the Groups Areas Act from Goodwood, who were moved over to Elsies, people who were thrown out of Constantia, people who came through the kind of unemployment created in the Northern Cape by the mines closing back then, the copper, people who came to town. And most of them came to this holding area, if one should put it that for want of a better word, where you put up a shack, informal house, and that is what it was. And the setup was one of yards. In other words, you had these, like in my case, my grandmother, both my grandmothers were matriarchs. They ran a yard. All their sons lived there. All their daughters, you get married there. All the kids basically get reared in that particular space. So that's the kind of poverty that you had. But it was also a situation where, with me, what was important, my father and my uncles and my grandfather used to slaughter animals. So think about the Elsies River and Ravensmead and Tivoli, slightly different. People actually had animals. They had sheep, they had pigs, they had all of those things. So I was trained slaughterers. So my life was, I always say in the book, we started off slaughtering chickens, and then we moved, and my big thing was I one day want to slaughter a pig. And I eventually reached that out of all of my cousins. It was proud. But it was a kind of world where it was hard to see beyond those Because if somebody would tell me you would be a doctor, I would just laugh at it. No, that's impossible.
Pipe dreams.
Yeah, we used to say, it translated in Afrikaans. It's for baby boers a ceiling geskiet. There's a ceiling. Maybe you can become a teacher.
Yeah, there's a glass ceiling.
Like for example, my uncle said, because I worked on the buckets. By the way, they sold greens and bathing, so those guys and fish. So I used to blow the fish horn at the back of the donkey cart and all of those things. But one of the things my uncle said, "Now you're brilliant. You're brilliant. You can count money very well. You must become a bus driver. Because you will be able to count the bus fares and never be." I said, okay, that's interesting. But to give you an idea, there was a ceiling to what we could do.
Yes.
The politics, my mother was a strong unionist in the clothing industry. She was a shop steward in all the factories she worked at. She got fired as a result of that at some point. And she, interestingly, she never supported the ANC back then. She was very left, but in a Trotskyist sense of the word.
Yes.
She said, no, the workers will... She had a biblical explanation. She says, your grandmother says the meek are the working class and they're going to build this, whatever. So I came through that thing. My father later became an ANC alderman post-1990, was very nationalist ANC in its orientation. So I think between those two influences, there was only one trajectory I was going into. I landed up being recruited into Umkhonto with Sizwe in 1983. Okay, and some people saw I seemed to have the personality for trying to be a minion or not standing out in a crowd and those kind of things. And thought that would be the best thing, and I had the type of commitment, maybe ideologically, that came with the influence of my father and my mother to take things further. So I was exposed to activists, senior activists like people, ANC guerrillas like Cecil Iso, older people from the 70s. And that's how I got involved, right through to university, until I started teaching in 85. And then in 87, I got arrested for terrorism inside my classroom, much to the shock of my principal at the time, who couldn't believe that this, actually other the teachers thought I was a gathond, like they say in Afrikaans. The principal's blue-eyed boy, and nobody ever associated me with anything to do with MK or politics.
The radical ideals.
Yeah, they just saw this is this conservative primary school teacher at that point in time who runs and after the principal every time, and the principal and basks in the glory of the principal. It was a good cover for me. It
You were
worked
already
well.
surviving an underground.
Yeah.
at that
So
point.
underground meant adopting a persona that would be totally contradictory to what you really are inside. And that's the successful of good cover in intelligence, is you cannot act being something else.
Yes.
You must become it.
And this was natural for you. I mean, this isn't something that you really thought
It was
about
natural.
becoming. So that therein lies the sort of magic, as it were.
Yeah,
of
apartheid
being-
prepares you for that.
Yes.
You see, I always said my dad sounds, and he is something different here, but when I go with him, he takes me along to where he works. We worked at Swen Mill, and we were involved at the young stage, going to work there to paint the factory or something. Then I saw a different father.
Right.
I even saw a father that adopts an identity of a slightly submissive person for strategic reasons. And I saw it perfectly. As differently. So in apartheid, I think the nature, the building yourself into something else to survive
Yes.
is natural. Okay? I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly to you.
No.
Yes,
It makes
that
total
makes
sense.
Yeah.
very vivid
Yeah,
sense.
you must hide who you really are constantly, otherwise the security police or everybody's going to pay attention to you. Or you might get fired in your job because you appear. So it was natural to me to be that. And so cover construction, long before I understood intelligence and anything, was a natural survival mechanism. And I think that's what other people even picked up who recruited me into MK in 83 and later sent me in the intelligence direction, in particular in the ANC. They picked up that I sort of do these things naturally.
Yeah, and you had the right profile.
Appropriate profile
Yeah.
for it, yeah.
Tell me, Jeremy, what was it? What was Robben Island like? And,
Oh, yeah.
how long were you there for?
Okay, one of the frightening things about Robben Island, now the whole world knew who I really was.
Yeah.
But Robben Island itself, yeah, it was I always say there are newspapers, there are books that we got there that would get you there if they found it with you outside.
Wow.
I was involved, I later became a political commissar. Part of it involved the storage of literature. And so I was brought into where all the hiding places are of that, and that whole underground kind of practice came also quite naturally to me. So during searches
on jail.
in jail,
Wow.
and I want to use an example in case you don't know. Do you know we read the Moscow News in there? We got the Saspo National in things. So no, you didn't get it in normally.
Wow.
But one of the things I can tell you now about how it worked is I was a teacher. Okay. So I was also in the school. There was a formal school on Robben Island. The principal of it at that time was another PAC political prisoner called Ahmad Kasim from Cape Town.
Right.
And whether it's ANC or PAC or whatever literature, that became an important tool to get it in through one simple thing is we were more educated than the warders. And many of them who wanted promotion. And most of them wanted to get off the island. Let me tell you that. It was not an ideal placing. It was like what they called a strafkamp, according to a punishment process. So we became the teachers who took them through matric. I, for example, had a warder I took, and I taught classes during sometimes when we were outside. And I had a warder in there, and I had two prisoners in there, both trying to finish matric. So I taught them. History was one of my subjects, and English, of course, most of them struggled with, and then Afrikaans I also did. So I'll tell you the Afrikaans story that was so difficult. So I taught those subjects to them. And once you have that relationship with a warder, they can't go back.
Yeah. Because they let their guard down a little bit.
They let their guard down.
Yeah.
Their survival is part of you. And then you use that relationship to get in what you want. And remember, whatever we get in through studies, correspondence, will be checked and doctored and censored, not what they get in. Okay, so you will have one of them studying at UNISA first year history. We will just load what we want through that, and they will bring it in and they will do it, and then through the classes we get it through. That was one of the ways in which you get. So they were important source.
Innovative tradecraft. Right? Even in prison.
Yeah, but I mean, my inclination towards covert ways of furthering the cause was natural. I was never a public UDF kind of personality out there. I prefer the more clandestine method. So that's one part of the Robben Island experience that helped there. I think the other thing about that is, I got to learn, because you learn about the bigger South Africa theoretically. Let me explain it to you. But the context of when I went there, my world was probably Elgis River, Tifley, and then it expanded as far as the northern suburbs. And so now and then Cork Bay for the beach or whatever. And it was Afrikaans, entirely. If you spoke English in the northern service, we would beat you up at school or something like that. It's not like now where most of the schools are English medium. So back then it is a different world, yeah. So coming out there to an environment that is multilingual and engaging intellectually with writing, I also found fascinating because I was exposed to authors, for example, to Russian authors, to British authors like Raymond Williams, things that I would never have access to otherwise. And Günter Grass and these kind of figures. So the type of literature that it would become influential in my later writing comes from what I saw at Robben Island. I never had exposure to that literature outside of that. And just dealing with different cultures in our countries, I never thought so many other people spoke Afrikaans in our countries besides people on the Cape Flats and some white comrades I knew from New South. And then I get to see comrades from Limpopo, what is now Limpopo, what is now Mpumalanga, and see these people are speaking Afrikaans like I am. So that was the one interesting thing. But I think this is a story, a very interesting thing. Another guy who was a teacher in the Afrikaans school with me was an MK comrade who went to prison with me called Nicolo Pedro. He's late now. Nicolo Pedro came bereid.
So mom's bereid.
Yeah, so one of this, Ibrahim, who's late now, Nicolo was his Afrikaans teacher. So Nicolo taught him the alphabet. But every time when they came to the R, it was R. And at one stage, people said Nicolo is struggling with Ibi, and the one is R, and then the one says, no, nie R, and not R, and it R. Eventually they had to come and call me and a few others to pronounce the R properly in Afrikaans. So yeah, those are some of the funny moments. So that's how Ibrahim learned Afrikaans and the right way of saying the R.
Wow. And Janet just helped finish his book. Janet wrote his book.
Yes.
Ashley, you'll see Ashley Forbes, who was also very close to him.
Yes.
He taught Ashley Forbes how to drink tea. He taught many of us how to drink tea as part of a proper ceremony. But Forbes and myself, and Nicolo Pedro and Peter Jacobs, Anwar Dramat, all of us were part of one trial group. So we were, that's the one linkage, yeah.
Andre,
Jeremy, these stories, are, wow, I mean, they carry incredible human power, and it's very difficult to get to grips with just a cold fact, that people were sent to Robben Island, for example, or people were operating in an underground system without hearing, the stories. The history alone, just the facts, make absolutely no sense.
Yeah, no, and Jeremy, I also just wanted our listeners just also to hear from you where your journey continued. So, the sunset clause came into place. There was a transition, and there was sort of an amalgamation of National Party, security, infrastructure people, and the ANC, MK people coming together. Could you just tell us about that journey up until where we are today, and that dirty war as it continued?
Remembering that by that stage you were working on a very regular basis with Bradley and Neil. I mean, your underground structure, which included them, was very much up and running. Is that right, Jeremy?
Well,
Yeah,
all the different
yeah.
DISLs.
I think that we just... What was the challenge for me when I came out in June 1990, for example, from Robben Island, was the fact that I had come out into a world where everyone was euphoric about the release of Madiba, but I know from my experience through the negotiation process where comrades were released into KZN and the East Rand, like two very close comrades of mine, two of them were murdered within weeks after the release. This was now because we did not have the comfort of the underground identity anymore.
Right.
That mechanism, we come out into the world alone, everybody knows exactly who we are. And we automatic targets. So if somebody wants to look for ANC people in the Midlands, you just look at the name of the person who's been released.
Yeah.
So we became the targets of proxy wars, of all of those things. So for me, coming out, the safest option was going back into the underground part and not going another one. And that's how I ended deepening my involvement in the intelligence part and ended up with further training by the Special Air Services and by the British SIS, or MI6 or MI5 alternatively, in terms of the previous one, what we talked. So I wanted to deepen my almost ability to survive in this environment. You see, and that's probably why my approach to intelligence was an offensive. It's a war intelligence kind of thing instead of the environment we're in now.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes,
So
yes.
so that my training in weaponry that I received, I was particularly emphasis on the latest firearms and beyond the AK and those things. The Brits, for example, made us master the Heckler&Koch MP5 at the time, the Steyer and Org, the first kind of half plastic kind of SMG. We were exposed to the Ingram, one of the fastest firing machine guns that we have in the world.
Yeah, these are all fully automatic
weapons. So I mean, I got involved in training, in an obsession with training and weaponry, from the perspective that I have to survive a firefight. It was not about self-defense. I have to survive a firefight because I was constantly under that. So that is how I move into the 90s. And in intelligence in particular, it was offensive. You know, it was an offensive war. They were trying to, NIS, military intelligence and security branch, extract information about us and still neutralize some of us, and we had exactly the same approach towards them.
Now, I recall during those times, Andy Miller showing us photos of Jeremy and Andre, and said, you know, we need to keep an eye out for these guys and what they were doing.
Yeah, we were... I don't like the terms hawks and doves and that thing because that's a media invention of the time. But, yeah, you could say I was a kind of diehard in terms of, not ideologically necessary.
No, you were hardcore.
Because I was one of the last of the ANC intelligence leaders in the Western Cape. And I had to be almost coaxed into, without my knowledge, into a situation where I must meet the security branch people while others, like Andre and them, had met them before, and everybody was worried. If we introduce Jeremy, is he going to pull a gun, or what is he going to do?
No,
and all of those things.
You were hardcore back then.
That was the type of thing. I think I deal with it in my book. In one bride thing they set up and that, and I was still had this mentality. I was the kind of guy who went in to a restaurant. I would rather eat with my left hand so that my gun hand remains free. It was it became my own personality. If I had a sort of shotgun or something under me, or an AKM or something, my whole posture, my whole clothing, my whole freeing of my hands would be about that. So one of the things about this braai that was shocking to me, I thought, wait a minute, why are my comrades, eating with a chop? They have a plate with a chop in there, and they have a beer in the one hand, and who's going to reach the gun fast enough? So those were the kind of things. So even with
just to give our listeners a bit of a backstory. So Jeremy and his MK intelligence structure guys were invited to a braai with the enemy, in essence, to start the transition and starting to work together. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so that was the mentality of. I think the first time I met them also, it was the same kind of approach, because someone else is telling us about these guys introducing. So where you position yourself in the restaurant, how you determine your field of fire, what is behind you so that you don't have a threat behind, and all the threats you can face from the front. That determined where one sits, how one watching, and to tell you
how we escape, how
we get out of here. Okay, if we shoot. If Brad and Neil start shooting, how exactly are we going to extract ourselves from this environment? So you start calculating.
Having your car ready outside.
And all of those kind of things. So you have all these contingencies planned. So even in that first meeting with them, there was, in my mind, calculate fine. Okay, I'm told they will become assets and all those kind of things. But, I don't quite trust the risk, and you still plan as if they also can be part of the particular risk. Yes. So if they had done something wrong, they would have been shot, if I should put it that plainly.
and we felt the same way, because I talk about that in the opening, I had my CZ75 with me. I had no idea. I just knew that there was this guy that had some fingers missing, that was spent 7 years on Robben Island, and he was a dangerous guy, and but here we are many years later, good friends, and Jeremy, I just wanted to just ask you, the operation where Andre got actionable intelligence and thwarted a plot to completely destabilize our country. Kulumabata actually spoke about it in an earlier episode, saying if it wasn't for Lincoln and Vearey and our team, etc. Go ahead.
Okay,
Tom.
it covered the period before before the inauguration
of Nelson
Mandela as President Nelson Mandela. I was also partly responsible because I ran a snipers team in the ANC. We had Dragunov rifles and all those kind of things. Via Andre, I remember at the time, we got word of a 50 millimeter caliber rifle, specially constructed.
Handmade.
Handmade. That would be used to take out Nelson Mandela at the inauguration day. That particular rifle was under the control of a security policeman in Gauteng. Okay.
In the Oudtshoornsval back then.
Yeah. It was eventually found, by the way, by Andre and them and those things. But that was the reason why you had special ballistic glass in front of the president when he gave a speech. Because we and by the way, that ballistic glass wasn't South African. It came in especially. So there was a lot of thing that at the time we got hold of. Benz made special vehicles that can handle a certain type of caliber, because I don't know if you know, a 50 millimeter caliber sniper's rifle is a very powerful thing. It's not a 7.65 caliber thing that you're firing. These things can handle long distances of effective range, 3 to 4 kilometers effective range. So that was the type of thing. So and that was exposed back then. So while some of us were on the other side preparing, the intelligence of that became actionable, and there was the involvement of them in further finding out, like, who in the branch is exactly busy with this thing. Is it some rogue capability? Because we have some of it, and why were they able to plan this thing in such a way without us noticing? By then we had deeply penetrated some of the intelligence agencies, and some of them were working for us. So who exactly is this small group,
This
proxy group that went under the radar and then was able to plan such a massive operation?
And what was fascinating?
And with a 50 caliber thing, look, these days we talk 50. We've talked 50.
Tell them about the desk.
Oh yeah, in the desk in the office. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say, these days when you talk snipers, rifles, it's almost normal when you talk about Iraq and to talk about and the culture of, what's the one movie we heard about the sniper who died eventually. It's normal to talk about these terms, but to talk about a 50 millimeter specially constructed sniper's rifle before 1994 was a significant thing. So all of these things.
And what was fascinating?
But by the way, it was found in the desk eventually of a security policeman.
What they did is they constructed a desk specifically to hide the parts of this sniper rifle in the desk.
Extraordinary.
Jeremy, your career as later on you've been the head of detectives in the Western Cape, and
I was head of covert intelligence first and shifted to the detective. In other words, I ended up in 95 taking over from Gordon Banks, who was my enemy before, in the undercover kind of thing. We had an office here at Fort Trust, and we were called Marine Investments. We all looked apart and all those things, but. I took for undercover, and I took off and I ran the office for a while. So I ran the team of operatives. I got involved in training people in covert collection, particularly in how to successfully adopt covers and agents who need to go into the gang environment. I got involved in making them understand the gang culture. I could speak all the different dialects of the 26, 27s, and 28s. And I trained people how to recognize when we are listening to gangsters speak, whether we're monitoring him in prison, how to interpret those language. And I became an expert witness in that throughout the courts through to now.
Now, this was a completely different underground that you were beginning to have to confront, in the sense that the political side of your work had been somewhat resolved. It was a post-1994 setup where there was a government of national unity, and there was people were working together on a sort of nascent basis. But this is when the Jeremy Vearey, who a lot of younger South Africans now know today, started to emerge. That person who, as you've just described, had to come to know each and every granular detail of each and every gang. And that person is exactly the same person who was, blowing the horn on the back of those bakkies, selling fish and so on. But inside yourself, you were developing this very deep and profound individual who is today Jeremy Vearey.
Yeah.
But it is that person in the 90s who perhaps is the most well-known to many South Africans.
I think it was still governed by the ideals of freedom as I saw it under the Freedom Charter. Forget about the ANC now. And one of the things that I came to understand, that organized crime and gangsterism and corruption is almost as pernicious in its effect as apartheid was. The difference is now that we are in government and the resources are there. The quality of people's freedom is being affected by the revenue not going in the direction to better everybody's lives and ending up in the pockets of the elite. So to me, it is almost in some way, if one thinks about my same freedom, the same politics, just a politics of organized crime, where whether it is the corrupt person in parliament or in the police or in government that results in not the same quality services being rendered to the people who deserve that freedom, or whether it is the gangster who decides that he expropriates Manenberg and calls it his turf unlawfully and uses it for illegal profiteering with the selling of drugs, robbing the people. To me, it's the same curtailment of the freedoms that we fought for. Because you have no freedom of movement in Manenberg. You have no freedom of association in Manenberg. You have to check whether you make friends with this family or have a girlfriend in that particular or a boyfriend in that area because that is HL territory and maybe you cannot traverse that because you live in this territory. So these things were affecting people's freedom in movement in the same way that the party did. The type of organized crime that grew to me was the same thing I saw under apartheid. You know, one of the interesting things one tries to gloss over is the great Palazzolo example, Vito Palazzolo, which Lincoln and I was also involved in investigating earlier long before he came a name, was that Palazzolo had the support. He was given a birth certificate professing to be born in Burgersdorp. I mean, the man is from Terracini in Italy. It was one of the biggest pizza mafia trials in Europe in the 80s.
And decided to make Cape Town his home.
Understand why. If the system back then could be corrupted in the way to make a person like this survive, because the person had connections in underground networks to beat sanctions, to smuggle goods into this country. Organized crime is not new to me, you know, and it's the same pernicious effects we see later, politics aside of the matter. And to me, even more so now, I think, to some degree, I could understand, well, that was the corruption of apartheid under that time. But now I'm dealing with comrades who were on the island with me, comrades whom I know, people with whom I shared certain ideals. And that drove me in a different direction. I knew inevitably I'm going to confront all of this. Because inside the system, the people who were being used to protect the corrupt were people from the old homeland systems who became generals and all of those things. So they did not want me. My own comrades would not want me because I would have a different way of relating to it. Or Andre, for that matter.
And because you'd call them out on their corruption and their bullshit.
And I would make a difference what the investigation... I take the fakey mentor, I honor what she contributed to the, she is, although they try to say one of them, but she is the first one who made an affidavit to me on the Ogbay corruption and on other corruption involving the president. A highly risky thing to do at the time when nobody even knew what the words state capture meant. Long before the public protector at the time got that. She seeded that type of thing.
And she's so inspiring in her.
Many comrades
her
after
work.
me afterwards, how did you get to do that? I said, you know, one thing that is positive. If there are comrades in the ANC who still want to come forward under difficult circumstances, and like they did, many of them years later, and speak to me and put the evidence of people, I will follow it wherever it goes. And I think that is what the people I encounter who want to get rid of me see. In Andre, myself, we are just going to work the thing to the bone. And it doesn't matter who, whether it's the president of this country or whoever. It doesn't matter. Because even with them, it is, to me, worse than apartheid. It is, we believed in certain ideals that we should serve the people. And to corrupt those ideals for your personal profit, to me is something it is a betrayal of that type of a deal. So I would probably, I always say it's inevitable what happened to me, because I would have fought it, I still fight it with the same energy that I had when I did under apartheid.
For our listeners that don't know, Jeremy Vearey has been, and Andre Lincoln and Peter Jacobs, people that Jeremy and I have spoken about, and Janet have spoken about, have campaigned and worked tirelessly to expose corruption at the highest levels of the South African police force. And unfortunately for that, when you expose powerful, corrupt people, they have the tendency to fight back. Jeremy was relieved of his post as Major General and Head of Detectives in the Western Cape. Jeremy was also looked over as Provincial Commissioner for Cape Town, for the Western Cape, and it just seems to me that all the good work that you guys have done and you continue to do. Peter Jacobs getting relieved of his post at Crime Intelligence. All the cases and legal battles that my handler Andre Lincoln has gone through, and the stress that he's been through, and then what's happened to Jeremy, and these guys have exposed the rot all the way to the top, and I just find it incredibly sad that our leadership in this country, treat our heroes this way. And Jeremy, what do you think we can do as collectively as citizens to help you and help Miss Mentor has just passed away, unfortunately, and help continue the legacy of these of you guys and the work that you've done in exposing and fighting corruption and making it a better place for us so that we can do better by our citizens?
I think two things. One part of it is the very process we're engaging now is to get the dominant voices from the community. Okay, from people who were in the thick of things, who talk differently. That to me is the first part. One thing about our media is we do not these days only take the cue from his master's voice or prayer or spokespersons of government. We go look for the alternative view. And that to me is the first part of the crucial. Go find the alternative story. Whether you are doing it in an interview, whether you're doing it, always find the alternative story. I sometimes get frustrated when I get interviewed by other people and they're asking me a stock set of questions that feed some editorial requirement. And there's nothing different from what they. So that's the thing. Always seek the alternative view, the grassroots view, the view of people who can speak truth to power in a very real way. That's the one thing. But civil society, don't forget, people are more organized in various organizations than they ever were before, contrary to what we might think. If you look at the amount of neighborhood watches, street committees in this country, various forms of civil issue-based organizations, they are larger than what they ever were under apartheid. They are more localized and spread more at a grassroots level in various parts of our countries. You speak about something in Pitsonavata and you hear there's an organization of the community doing it. Yeah. Those are the voices that if they are coordinated correctly, that can prevent the master's voices from being the only in the platform, that can outcrowd the voices of power. And that to me is an important, organizing people and that thing. And that to me is what is a positive thing, that we have greater grassroots and issue-based and NGO mobilization around social issues and speaking truth to power than what we ever had before. I think political parties have lost the plot. I don't care whether they're ANC, DA or wherever they are. Indeed. They have become locked into the competition of battling for power while they forgot that the real service is to the constituency. And I think if any one of them sits at their day and looks at it, any politician for that matter, how much time have I actually spent on my constituency, then it will be shocking. They spend more time in the corridors of institutional power than anything. So that's the one part of it that I think. The other part is with our security services, I think there is a great need for accountability that seems us moving in the intelligence world, for example, and it's a shift I later became part of thinking, where human security is the primary thing instead of state security.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Human security, what's the use of me chasing few guys, which I must, who come over from Al Shabaab into South Africa and spend all my resources on that? That is probably going to result in a certain threat that might be spectacular, while consistently people die of hunger.
Food
in
security,
Mpumalanga,
human
food security.
Yeah.
I must be able to detect the potential problems in our environment that will lead to anger exploding into more radical forms of action that can be exploited by sectarian agendas. I must be able to edit. That is the work of an intelligence community. At a policing level, we are certainly not enough to police from a purely bureaucratic way where the station is the center of policing and us in uniform are what projected. If we think we can build more uniforms, we are on the way to becoming a police state. If you are happy with having a police officer standing every 100 meters down this road, well, let me tell you, that doesn't deter crime because they operate around it.
Yes.
So our approach should be, who should be assisting? Because we certainly don't have enough forces to be everywhere in this country. It is social organization of the people that must complement that. And beyond just eyes and ears.
And not rely on government.
Not rely on
time,
government. Yeah. The police ought to have a community policing or ethos informed by the approach that we are the last resort, but we need to correct the first steps along the way and get involved with the process from the beginning. Get involved in what happens with schools. Let me just explain, when I was station commander, initially, Mitchell's Plain has 118 schools. It's the highest amount of concentration just in a small place in this whole country. It has over 14 high schools. Now, and it's the gangsters strive to recruit from that people. Now, if I can see at the age of 12, this kid is getting involved, that by the age of 18, this kid will be a hitman, I should get involved there in working with that to prevent that child from being exposed to gangsterism at school or from that. So I should flag those things.
From that culture, yeah.
From that culture, that's the one thing. There's work to be done there with other community organizations. So to me, that proactiveness in policing is to me important. And the other part is, one of the things that should change in policing is we really need to resource detectives. It's an irony that while everybody demands visible policing in this country, the only people who get you in jail is a detective. And they are of the smallest part of the police service in any country for that matter. So there's a greater need to expand the capacity that brings about a solution on the extreme end of the spectrum that gets people, if you commit a crime, to things. So the prevention part, as I said, through greater social compact and collaboration with community, through community policing and the strengthening of detectives to deal with the fallout. I think our fundamental changes, we have the right ethos, we talk the right language, but practically we need to instill managers to be able to do the thing. And to me, that is sadly lacking at this point in time.
A follow-up question. Why have you and Jeremy and why have you and Andre and Peter been sabotaged? And Who's behind it? Do you want to talk about that? Let's expose them.
I think firstly, the classical old versus new, apartheid versus new kind of dichotomies don't apply anymore here. There's been a convergence of interest around organized crime in this country.
Yes.
And the abuse of politics. And it doesn't matter. You get piece of power, whether it's ANC, DA or whatever. We see these things across party political, across institutional power platforms, irrespective of the parties people come from. So for me, tackling the issue firstly and taking away the politicized part of the debates is to me crucial. Because once one steps into that terrain in the security services, we will prevent what has happened to the past, where people become polarized around political factions, where they think their job is about, serving this faction and that faction. Your job is serving the community and tackling organized crime. That is what I think. And that ethos is something that must shift within us. When a general stands up, and the biggest thing he's worried about when he goes to parliament is what will happen to him politically if he doesn't speak in a certain way. He's not worthy of being a general. He's not worthy of being a general.
He needs to be a civil servant
thing. And that's one of the things I say that always went wrong in Marikana. When that provincial commissioner there stood up and said, it ends here today, and started making comments about the platinum price falling, that has absolutely nothing to do with police.
And yet that said everything that we need to know.
What does the platinum price have to do with me as a cop? I don't act. I act from what the Criminal Procedure Act, the Police Act, and various statutes tell me to act. I don't look at that through first referring to a political imperative or how the companies on even our current president's company that they had shared in is suffering financially in the rest of the world. That is entirely irrelevant to my job. So that type of thing. And inside the police, I think, in terms of leadership level, this blatant tribalism must just simply stop. You have a manager that comes, or a provincial commissioner, and he brings in his colleagues from KZN, and they staff all of the positions, and they go back, leave it. Then you have another one coming in, and he does the same thing. Okay, this kind of tribal racism that is a spillover of the old Bantustan systems, where most of these people come from who do these things. That kind of culture must have. But as for the solution, one of the things about the mid-90s is we came up with creative ways in which we should approach safety and security. The National Crime Prevention Strategy is a very creative process. But in terms of the will and the competence of the people who became generals afterwards to give effect to the National Crime Prevention Strategy, that was missing from those in power in the security community. So what do? They react to the reactive type of policing or crime combating approach that we have today, where we throw numbers at a problem and not think creatively beyond that. And that, unfortunately, there's no programs. I mean, at a management level, for example, we all know you can have an objective, but you must have a sequence of steps that works back to the more basic unit of work to reach that sequentially. And if you can't see that in your management company and you try to say, this is what I'm doing on the ground and this is what I want to achieve, you can't see the chain of building up to that thing for simple management competence, then you are wrong. That's why we will never implement the National Crime Prevention Strategy. The ideals are out there, the tactics we run around at the ground, but there's no linkage between these things. There's no execution.
And management.
Yeah.
So I have the unfortunate task of wrapping up this episode with.
But can I just say, there is hope, because there are people Andre and I might be gone, but there are actually people who still think this way.
Yes.
And to me, what is positive is a lot of the youngsters who are coming into the police today, they are not affected by our baggage,
Yes. Yes.
by our issues, homeland police officers, old apartheid, DIS people, anything. They are not affected by these issues that continue to bedevil management in the police. So to me, okay, you might say it's a bit troublesome. We can't wait another 20 years or 30 years, but there is a shift with the new blood, and they come without baggage.
A new generation.
They come with a new generation.
And with a new, fresh outlook as well.
And we should, some of us like myself, I would welcome a question, an opportunity where I'm able to play a role
Yes.
in the more operational and skilling of those people. But
I'm a little biased, but I think you should be the chief, the minister of police. But that's just me.
I'm not a politician.
No, I know. But you know what I learned from you as well many years ago was, and I think it's a Trotskyan ideal. And Comrade Chris Hani had a very similar mindset, and I think you might have got some of that and helped put it into this young mind that I had back then, and was that was just making sure that we lift our people up, and we just give them a fighting chance to you know, because people are still so destitute, and you know, the crime is affecting us, COVID's affected us, you know, we really need to try and stick together
But Jeremy has described that so eloquently around where does not only the existing political power, the future political power lies in that very space, in peasant communities, in working class communities, in suburbs, where people have these committees, or they have structures where they're working together. But I'm going to throw you a question now that takes us away from all of this as we wrap up, and that relates to a lovely discussion we had outside before the podcast started. Jeremy, you might not have pictured yourself as an author when you were growing up, but now again, as I was saying, in the 90s, you were perceived in a particular way, coming to grips with that organized crime capacity. Now you have a very different, perhaps even wider platform through your writing, through the way that you're teaching writing. And you describe the joy that you are getting from that. And perhaps this is also some kind of balm for your own mental health. This incredible writing, and you've turned you are a brilliant writer. I don't know if you ever pictured yourself that way.
No. I never pictured myself in that way. But one thing that I got from my mother is, besides her forcing me to learn English, but that because people in Elsie's River must start speaking English. Maybe she had a point there. Yeah. They all almost speak English nowadays. But anyway, was the fact that in writing about whether it's fiction or non-fiction in our country, there are areas where we haven't penetrated before, where we need to write open history, I think.
Tell stories.
From those things. Go excavate those stories that people need to know. Our generation now, our young people need to know. Otherwise, this grand narrative, you know, that only looks at one side and another side in this binary way, is always going to be there. It's always going to be the dominant voice in publishing. It's going to be the dominant voice in stories. Correct. Go to the small parts. You'll find microcosms that can be told universally, that can have universal value, even though it's local. Let's take this book of Brad, for example. Nobody knew about this terrain, as far as I'm concerned, in the way he depicts it there. People, if they stuck to the grand narrative of how the change came, Madiba, miracle, and all of those things, there's almost this binary shift from, okay, there was this, and then it suddenly became that, and nobody understands the interregnum that happens here. Writing stories like this exposes us to what that interregnum was. Something unwritten. The same with, I think, my books. I wanted to write. People never associated me because when they started getting to know me, they thought I grew up speaking English. And until I wrote Jeremy Vearey, people were shocked. Oh, okay. And then when I started telling people Afrikaans is my first language, I say Kaps is my first language, Afrikaans my second language, and English my third language. It shocked people, but people started getting used to the idea that there's something else here that they never knew about before.
And is this helping you to survive on a deeper level inside your core, to survive not only the thunder that's going on around you in terms of your history and how that is all, bringing, I guess, everything to a crescendo, but quietly inside yourself, in terms of your personal and mental health survival. Has writing unexpectedly brought that to you?
Yes, it has. I mean, at this age of my life, I'm a few months short of 60. And one of the things, it's a kind of self-reflective period over the past few years running up to that. And one of the issues is that helped me, it is a major shift transition period. Okay, it's the sort of period where you almost come to realize I cannot change the world like I used to before. Okay, it has changed the terrain. So how do I go about now making sense of what is happening around it for myself and to still make a contribution to that? So at the level of myself, given coming from the intelligence project, the underground, you never thought about yourself.
Right.
Okay, you were almost always part of this. I always talk in my new book with another character about the minion complex. You were part of this broader collective in which you were de-individualized to some extent to fight the war the way you had to. It was probably necessary, but you are now at the phase where you critically need to prepare your new self for this monumentous change that I am. And that is what writing has done. It forced me to critically look inside myself because there were no neat ideological answers in theories anymore. Wow. Those things don't serve me anymore. Yeah. I need to find something inside myself to take me through the next stage. It also helped me in a therapeutic way because, until much later, I never thought that. I thought what I was going through was normal. But then I look at the faces of people who hear certain things and read the book, and one chap was telling me, it's a wonder you are not severely depressed, or you haven't taken out a gun and shot yourself yet. So I was not thinking, but this is a bit extreme. But then I was like, what do you mean? And they pointed out certain experiences that I depicted. And they said, but no normal person goes through this. So I said, okay, that's interesting. But then let me tell you now, it's probably writing about it forced a kind of introspection, and finding the right words to express something is an important process because you must critically go look at how you feel about something.
Yes.
And find the right words to describe it. You cannot lie to yourself.
It's tremendously difficult.
It's tremendously difficult. So to me, that was the positive part of the experience. Whether it was Jeremy Vearey, whether it was the issue of my police careers with the memoir Into Dark Water, that was a positive part of the thing. Wow. Expressing how I feel about something. Whereas before, if you talk to me, In the time of my life, I would give you a perfect ideological or theoretical or intellectual explanation about myself as if I don't exist in that situation.
Yes.
Writing has made me realize that I do exist and helped me to equip me to approach the future.
So-
That in a way, Brad. I'm sure with Brad is the same. I mean, he would not have been here if it wasn't for the exercise of undertaking that book. He would have probably been, the post-operative kind of man settling down, dealing with his demons internally and that kind of things without putting it out there in a way that forces you to critically interrogate yourself.
And you can do that with this enormous audience. Gentlemen, thank you both so very much. Thank you for everything that you contribute and that you have contributed, and it was a privilege.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My goodness, thank you, Jeremy.
Okay.
You continue to inspire. For those of you that are out there listening, if you've ever wanted to write, go out there and just write.